is so important, all right? If you live in a world where nothing feels safe to you, you have to have safety somewhere. You're going to have to create it, okay? People tell me, why is my kid so addicted to video games? Because every time he plays that video game, he knows exactly how it's going to work. He knows what's going to happen. It's not going to change. He can relax now because he doesn't have to deal with all of this scary unpredictability, overwhelming, sensory, executive functioning. Well, do you want to go here? Do you want to go there? Do you want to eat dinner at Fuddruckers or do you want to eat dinner at Red? You really expect me to be able to make that decision? I'm so overwhelmed to begin with. If I'm playing my video game, I'm like, my brain can relax now because I don't have to figure anything out. I already know what's going to happen. When I was a kid, one of my favorite shows was The Brady Bunch. I love The Brady Bunch. I still do to this day. And this is really sad. But I'm going to tell you why a lot of your kids will want to watch the same movie. Oh, why does he want to watch that movie 50 million times? You know, why does he like that show so much? I'll tell you why. Because social interactions and the whole world is so overwhelming to us. You know, we still are human. We still want social connection, you know? Some of us don't, but most of us do. Now, if you want social connection, and it's so difficult to have it with people because you're speaking very, very different languages, and people refuse to acknowledge that your language is actually valid, and they refuse to accommodate that, and they're always telling you that you're wrong and you're the one with the deficit, you know, which you're not, because your language is just as valid as theirs. They just don't want to acknowledge that. You know, you put a bunch of autistics in a room, they don't have trouble talking to each other, you know. But when you crave a social interaction, you can't have it. If you're watching a TV show or a movie, you can have that social interaction. You are now able to have that. Because what a lot of us will do, and what I did, you know, I couldn't socially interact with people at school or whatever. I mean, people thought I did, but I didn't, you know. It's a great masking thing, where you mask because you don't want to be bullied, so you have to pretend that you fit in when you really can't. But I would watch this show and other shows that I liked or movies, and would actually build relationships with these characters. Because I always knew what they were going to say. I always knew what I could say. I always knew that they weren't going to judge me. They weren't going to bully me. You know, they weren't going to criticize every word that came out of my mouth. You know, they weren't going to bully me for not understanding their unspoken, you know, body language, whatever the hell that is. You know, I could actually have friends with these characters. And they didn't judge me, you know. So I felt like they were my friends. And that was a great way to have friends, because I now had this group of friends that I could pretend to communicate with, and it was no trauma and drama in a communication. You know, I have autistic friends who have built, you know, they say autistics don't have imagination. I'm like, I'll beg to differ. I have autistic friends who have built entire worlds in their imaginations that you guys can't even begin to comprehend, because they're seeking social interaction. So they have to create it, okay? So when that child or that person is watching the same thing over and over and over, they're having a social bond with that character or whatever. And And that's how they can have that need met. So, I have a lot of parents tell me, oh, should I make my kid stop? I'm like, well, you gotta have a balance, you can't spend 24/7 playing your video game or whatever, but you really have to consider that that might be the only social life interaction your kid is getting, And so, to deprive him of that, you're basically, that's kind of cruel. So you have to kind of balance it out and try to understand, well, maybe this is coming from something I didn't realize. Now you want to be careful not to let it become an addiction, but we really want to start thinking about these things in terms of maybe they're not what we thought they were, But yeah, that whole social interacting thing, it's tough, man. It's really hard, and I want to tell you, when you are growing up, and I know for me, growing up as someone who didn't know I was autistic, it was very hard because people were always, I never understood why I couldn't really get what was going on. Especially, in junior high school, where the little girls kind of stand around in a circle and talk about stupid things like makeup and boys and things that don't make any sense, and you just want to still play with, dolls in the sand, and, And this is huge, because you kind of feel like, I remember when I was that age, and I really wondered, and I'm not even exaggerating, I spent a few years wondering, am I even human? Am I really even human? Because I just couldn't get it. I couldn't understand this whole, let's just sit around and talk about silly things stuff, and people couldn't understand me, and it just and as you get older, and that interaction becomes more and more difficult, people want to start, as they get older, they start going to clubs or bars or whatever people do, and you're just like, why, and you try to fit in, you try so hard to fit in, but it makes no sense at all. You really start to think, am I actually even human? Do I belong in society at all? And then if people come back and criticize you for the way that you speak, or the way that you respond, or the way that you behave, this is the point I like to make. Autistic behavior, autistic social structure, we do have a social structure, is just as valid as anybody else's social structure. But when you're always being told, no, your social structure is wrong, your way of communicating is wrong, you're the one with the deficit because I don't want to make the effort to understand you. How many foreigners do we have in this country? Okay? Do we treat them that way? Oh, you're from China, you're not speaking English with perfect grammar, so I'm just going to tell you have a deficit and you're wrong. Why do we treat our autistic people that way? We don't treat foreigners that way. Why can't we have the same respect and say, you know what? I understand your language is different. Why don't I make an effort, rather than making you make the effort all the time, why don't I make the effort to try to understand your language? Because what happens is we start to feel very devalued, as people. Because, and I'm speaking from my own perspective, I tend to feel like my life has no value, okay? Because your music is more important, your speech patterns are more important, the fact that every time we have a conversation and I'm speaking logically and you're speaking emotionally or socially and you're not making any sense, but yet I'm the one who's wrong every single time, even though I'm sticking to the facts, which facts are not wrong, but yet you're insisting that I'm wrong because I'm sticking to the facts and you just want to be emotional. I'm thinking, wow, I have no value. There's nothing about me with value. Because everything is called a deficit. Everything is called wrong. Everything is called, if you don't do things the way we want you to do it and present yourself the way we want you to do it. I've been having this battle with the music thing because it's such an issue for me. I've had people tell me, why don't you take medication to change your neurotransmitters? Why don't you move to a place that doesn't exist, where people don't play their music loud? Why don't you stop going out? I've been told by a police officer who came to my door when I called for help. I was in my home, and he says, why don't you find somewhere else to go? And I'm like, why don't you just get a headset? It's like $5 at Five Below, No, we can't do that. We'd rather change your brain and your DNA and your neurotransmitters and make you move and rather than just turn it down,
On the music, is it simply the music itself, or does volume play into it as well?
It depends. For some people, it is volume. For me, it's frequency.
Okay.
So for me, my music, I can play all day long, the music that I resonate with. But anything that's got like a bass beat or that's like rap or something that's too fast, my brain just can't process that. So even if it's so low that it's undetectable to other people, I can still have a massive meltdown. And my solution is just wear a headset. And you can blast it in your head all you want. But no, that's too much to ask, But what are they asking me to do? Why is it not too much for them to ask me the things they're asking me? And so when you start to feel like you don't matter, like I am worth less than a $2 headset at Five Below, and you start to feel that way in every area of your life, If you don't have the conversation with me the way that I want you to have it with me, you're wrong, If you don't play with your toys the way that I want you to play with your toys, you're wrong. You start to feel like, what worth do I, and this is why, we go back to the suicide rate, They're high. But these are all issues that we have to consider. When we are dealing with people who are different, we need to respect that difference is okay. We need to understand that their way of doing, their way of being, their way that they were created is just as valid and just as important as anybody else. Okay? Stop using the word deficit. Now I understand, yes, it's really good for, DSM-5 or, diagnostics, that's fine. But in society as a whole, let's stop using the word deficit. Because I don't have a deficit in communication, I speak logically, I speak sequentially, okay? I think people who speak socially and emotionally have a deficit. But I'm not allowed to think that because I'm the minority. Okay? So let's start using different terminology. Like instead of saying deficit, let's just say that person speaks a different language. Because then we can say, oh, let's make the effort to actually learn that language. And to actually learn to communicate with these people. Rather than forcing them to accommodate us all the time. You think we get accommodations? How much do you think we have to accommodate neurotypicals all the time? We have to accommodate every single thing, every single day, let's kind of change our way of thinking so that we can meet in the middle and stop making autistic people do all the work. Okay, it's exhausting. What, yeah.
Can I ask you a question about, like, the gentleman you're referring to on the tube in London? Now I'm listening to what you're saying about sensory overload, and I'm thinking if you're present there with that person,
Yes,
your interaction with that person, or trying to help,
yes.
would actually create a higher sensory.
That's a
in-
great, excellent question. And I'll give you an example. I'm a Special Olympics athlete, and I was at one of the big games that we have, and there was another autistic gentleman, a guy, sitting next to me, and he was just, the way he was acting, you would think he was being defiant. Every time his coach would tell him, he'd be like, no, no, no. And we were at the opening ceremonies. They were having a basketball game. There was all kinds of stuff going on. And I was like, and she didn't know what to do with him. And I was like, oh, yeah, I can tell she's done her research, obviously. You know? And so I went over to him, and I asked him very, very softly, do you want a hug? And he said yes. And I gave him the deepest pressure hug, because that deep pressure hug will cause, you know, pressure, and it'll calm everything down. And then I did a spinal release. I took the heel of my hand, and I asked people to do this for me, and a lot of people won't. And I just, you know, those of you who've had infants, how you could take the heel of your hand when they were, you know, all upset, and just kind of run it down the spine from head to bottom, and they just calmed right down. Okay, that's a spinal release. It actually calms, you know, you can even try it on each other. You could take the heel of your hand and just, you feel that calm and cooling? It just calms you down. It just cools you. You feel that? You know, cools
Like
you
Christine's
Yeah.
face is like,
Yeah.
oh, wait a minute.
Okay. So simple things like that. If you see someone having a meltdown, you can go to them and just very, very softly, very calmly, very quietly, you know, you look like, oh, you're not fazing me at all. You just ask, would you like a deep pressure hug? You know, that's probably one of the best things you can do, because that's going to really, really help a lot of people. And sometimes they're going to be so blown away that you'd even ask. They'll be like, wow, you know. But so I gave this guy, I gave him the hug, and he immediately, and I gave him a spinal release, and he immediately just relaxed a little bit. And his coach was like, whoa, what'd you do there? Whoa! And I'm like, you know what, it's not that hard, you know? You could just do a little bit of research, and you can learn this stuff. But something as simple as that, you know? Or even just going to him and saying, you know what, how can I help, you know? And I think the biggest thing, when someone is having an instance like that, they want to feel that they're not a freak. They want to feel that they're not like a spectacle, you know? And to be treated with dignity and love and respect, and not, oh, what's wrong with you? You know, that goes a long, long way, because they're already feeling dehumanized. And just to show that, hey, you know what? It's okay. You know, you could be a grown man and burst into tears because of your shoelace. There's nothing wrong with that. And I'll be here to help. And that will go a long way, because, you know, it's all about compassion. It's all about caring. I actually had an instance where I was just released from the ER because I was so overwhelmed that I had gone into, you know, functioning issues, and I'm going to talk about functioning issues in just a bit. But what happens is, somebody like me who looks completely normal, a lot of people won't believe I'm autistic, and a lot of them don't actually understand how autism presents, especially in females, and especially in females who are quote-unquote high-functioning. And so I was in the hospital, and I was having issues, and my functioning level was up and down and up and down. Like I could walk and then not walk, I could talk and not talk, and it was just going in and out, in and out. So they automatically thought I was faking. And so they kicked me out of there. And as they were kicking me out, I was going from, the dark room, I had them turn the light off, and into bright and patterns, and I was just, I couldn't walk. And they called security, and they started bullying me. I mean, just bullying me to no end because they thought I was faking. And they were trying to kick me out of there, and so they wheelchair me out. They basically pushed me out of the wheelchair outside, and they were bullying me so much I actually went into full catatonia. And then they threatened to arrest me for being catatonic. They said, now you're refusing to move, now you're refusing to leave the premises, now you're refusing to talk, we're going to call the police and have you arrested for trespassing. I'm like, okay, I can see you've been trained in autism. And so, it was just so overwhelming. I just, and in that moment, if someone had just said, how can I help, and not, you're so, you're just blah, 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 and treating me like some kind of, I don't even know what, like some kind of criminal, or some kind of like, you're screaming in the train station, you're a scary person,
They made assumptions based on their own little world.
Exactly. You make these kind of assumptions about people, and you don't realize that person is so. Nobody wants to burst into tears in a train station. That's not something we want to do. So for him to even be at that point, how overwhelmed must he be? And wouldn't it be the best thing just to be like, dude, I'm here for you. I don't know you, I've never met you, but let me just, anything I can do to help you, and just be soft and gentle and kind. And so I finally get home from this whole ordeal, and I drive home. I live 2 miles from the hospital, so it took me 20 minutes to drive home, 2 miles. And I'm getting out of my car, and I'm so overwhelmed, now I can't walk. So I call 911, I said, I need, officers to help me because I can't walk across the parking lot to my house. The officers show up and they're like, well, we can call the ambulance and say, I'm like, no, you're not sending me back to that hospital. And I'm sitting there and I can't move. I can't, I'm literally not able to move. And I'm like, if you just help me, if you just, because the contact will help. It'll give a little bit of energy, it'll help. And they said to me, we're not trained. And I told them something that I'll probably use for the title of my next book. I said, you don't need to be trained. All you need to do is care. And their faces just were like, whoa. And immediately they just grabbed me and walked me to. But yeah, I mean, for people to be so out of touch with humanity that they couldn't even understand that it wasn't about being trained or qualified or certified or I've gone to, have a degree in this. All you have to do is care. And if you care, and if you allow your heart to speak, you will know what to do in that moment. How would you treat a little child in that moment? You would scoop that child up. You would show compassion. You would show gentleness. You would show love. Same thing if that child is 3, if that child is 53. It doesn't matter. All you have to do is care, and it will come to you. And that person will feel that energy, and that person will respond. But that's an excellent question. And on that note, since we're talking about these functionality things, that's another point I want to bring up with you guys is functionality is a word that I absolutely hate. Okay? These labels we give people, high functioning, low functioning, not. What the hell is that? So we have to understand what a developmental disability is, to understand that these words make no sense, and actually do hurt us. Now, I know that we need them because we don't, as of yet, have other clinical ways of determining people's abilities. So we'll tolerate these words until we find better ones. Okay, and I have a whole system in mind that would work a whole lot better, and we can talk about that as well. But you have to understand what a developmental disability is. Because a lot of parents will ask me, well, why does my kid, why is he like so mature and then he acts like a 2-year-old? When you have a child, a neurotypical child, a child who is neurologically typical in development, we have what we call milestones. You all know what milestones are. At 6 months they can do this, and then at 2 they can do that. Okay, so what happens is the brain, should I attempt to draw a brain? It might be fun, so let's try it. You guys are all gonna like laugh at me for my artistic abilities. I write a lot better than I draw. Okay, so let's pretend we can draw a brain here. Let's see, we got this side view here. All right, so it's gonna look like a helmet.
That's
your
pretty
brain.
darn good.
I was gonna say,
Cool, thank you.
little wrinkles on there.
Now, yeah, we got little wrinkles
All the way
everywhere. So, again, I'm not a doctor. Now, I come from doctors, but I always tell people I'm the 5th doctor. You know what I'm talking about? 4 out of 5 doctors recommend. I'm the 5th one. So, this is your brain. This is your brain on autism. So, here we have the front of the brain.
Frontal lobe.
Yes, frontal lobe. This is the limbic system. Okay? This is I think that's the cerebellum, I'm not sure. I think it is. So, when you have a neurotypical child, all of these different compartments of the brain, okay, they all do different things. All right? Now, I don't know what they all do, but I'm sure somebody does. But they all do different things. I know this one for sure. This is the emotional control. All right? This is where a lot of communication happens, I think. So you have all this stuff, and it's all developing relatively evenly. Okay? So as the baby's growing in the womb, as the baby comes out of the womb and grows in life, the brain grows as one unit together. Okay? So you're going to have a kid who's like 10 years old, per se. Emotionally, he's going to be about right around 10. He might, there'd be some variances. Socially, he's going to be right around 10. Physically, he's going to be right around 10, What is it? Speech, he's going to be. Okay, so because the brain is developing together as one unit. That's why you have milestones. That's why you can go, oh, I'm expecting the child to do this at this age because we know the brain is supposed to reach that level at that age. Now let's talk about the autistic brain. In the 2nd trimester of the pregnancy is where autism happens, okay? Neocortex grows like a beast. Limbic system does not, okay? What happens in the autistic brain is that all of these compartments are growing independently of each other, right? They're not growing together, they're all independent. So this guy might not grow very much. This guy might grow too much, okay? And then they kind of cap. Now we all will continue in our development, but the areas in which we kind of cap, they will continue to develop very, very slowly like a snail going backwards. So it's not like you're going to really notice a lot of development once it's capped. So let's say, for instance, the part of the brain that is very, very analytical. Okay, we see this a lot. Somebody like me, I'm going to use myself as an example. Very, very, very analytical. I will analyze you to death. Okay? My friend Mark and I, he's also autistic. He's also very analytical. We will have conversations on the phone talking about, autistic issues and analyzing them for 6 hours straight and not even realize that 6 hours has gone by. Okay? I was talking to a good friend of mine, and I'm running an autism training for a group, and it's 27 pages long. And he's like, we're gonna have to, condense it. And I'm like, why? It's only 27 pages long. And he says to me, how much can you read? And I said, well, when I was preparing for my diagnosis, Tony Atwood has a book called The Complete Guide to Asperger's Syndrome. It's about 400 plus pages, and I read it twice in a week. And I took notes and, analyzed it, and he was like, okay, and this guy's the principal of a high school. And he says, I can read about 5 pages a day. And I was like, what? So, we're talking about an analytical autistic person who can hyper-focus. I mean, we're talking about beyond comprehension, okay? Because this part of the brain is so overly developed. And it doesn't apparently seem to cap. Now you got the limbic system over here, okay? Emotional control. There was a study done by, gosh, I can't remember her name. But if you want to contact me later, I'll tell you. Back in a long time ago, back in like the 70s or something, she, Bergman or something like that. I'm so sorry, I forgot. But anyway, I'm horrible with names, I'm horrible with faces, I'm horrible with dates, but I'm great at remembering everything else. So she actually did a study, an autopsy study, and they studied autistic brains and neurotypical brains. And they found that every single autistic brain, without fail, the limbic system had too many neurons and they were too small, which meant it was the limbic system of children. Okay? So you have this incredibly analytical person who could basically converse with Einstein until the cows come home, who has the emotional capacity of a toddler. Okay? That would be me. My emotional capacity, my ability to handle and process emotional input is that of a 4-year-old. Okay? My social capacity is that of a 10-year-old. My practical intelligence capacity is that of a maybe 14 to 16-year-old. That will never change. I will always be around 4 to 6 years old emotionally. So when people see me and I'm in this mode, this persona, this is as I call it, they're like, wow, she's incredibly high functioning. But then, they might see me as a 4-year-old, okay? But because they don't understand how this works, if they see me acting as a 4-year-old, they're going to say, oh, she's manipulative, she's attention-seeking, she's, all this stupid stuff, right? And I've actually been punished severely for responding as a 4-year-old. Now, I can't help that. I can't do a lobotomy and change that. But people don't understand because they look at you and they go, oh, you're high functioning. I've actually had people tell me, because I see you functioning this way, I expect you to function this way across the board. Well, that's not how my brain works. And for you to hold me accountable for that, that is abusive. When I am in 4-year-old mode, I'm not an adult acting childish. I am actually a child because that is the capacity of my brain in that moment. So therefore, you have to relate to me as a child. And if you don't, it's funny. I had to force myself into a psych ward recently because I had gallbladder surgery. okay? The problem is, if I were low functioning, quote unquote autistic, I would be able to get respite services. As a high functioning, that's not available to me. When I came home from gallbladder surgery, the day that I got back home, 5 people within 2 hours drove by my house blasting their stereos. I was on the point of such extraordinary collapse that I didn't know if I was going to physically survive it. So I called my friend who works in the, crisis over at the hospital, and she actually heard me have a meltdown when somebody drove by, and she's like, get over here, I'll get you admitted because you need to rest. You need to recover from that surgery. So I ended up, but there's no ability for me to go anywhere because I can't get respite services. So I had to go to the psych ward for that. And so, now I remember socially, I'm about 10, 12 or so. And so when you go into the psych ward, whether you admit yourself or not, you have to be interviewed by the psychiatrist. Okay? And that can be interesting. So obviously I wasn't a psych patient, all right? So he was trying to tell me I had no business being in the psych ward. And I was like, no, I'm not leaving here because, I don't want to go home and die. And I have nowhere else to go. And so we were arguing back and forth and arguing back and forth. And so, I finally read his notes, and they were ludicrous, he was writing all this stuff about how, I'm acting, all combative, and he's diagnosing me with all this stuff. And he's like, well, we're going to rule out autism, and we're going to diagnose her with cluster A and cluster B and all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, first of all, you can't have both of those together, so, But anyway, so he's going on and on, writing in his notes how I'm this, person who's just, whatever. And it was funny because it occurred to me, and this is really an eye-opening moment for me, because I realized that when I was analyzing everything after the fact, like we talked about, I realized what happened. When he spoke to me socially, okay? Now remember, socially, I'm about 10 years old. So if you approach me socially rather than logically, you're going to get a social response, which is going to come from a 10-year-old. So if you have this conversation with me and I'm 10 years old, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to respond exactly like a 10-year-old would, okay? And this is a problem that I get all the time. People tell me, your response is not appropriate. Well, guess what? Yes, it is. Because if you're approaching me socially and I'm responding to you socially, that is perfectly appropriate because socially I'm 10 years old. If you approach me emotionally and I respond to you emotionally and you go, oh, that's not appropriate, yes, it is. Because emotionally, I'm 4 years old. And so if I respond to you like a 4-year-old would, guess what? That is completely appropriate. And so this is where a lot of problem happens. Because we get told all the time, you're not responding appropriately. So therefore, we're going to punish you for not responding appropriately. Well, if you actually understood my brain, you would realize that that is the absolute appropriate response that I'm giving you. Oh, shoot, we're running out of time.
Yeah.
It's so much fun.
I know.
Can I shoot?
Yes, yes,
No,
Spectrum.
yes.
Could you explain that, because you're, one end of the spectrum?
Okay, that's a brilliant question. And there's